There are two types of public speakers in the world. Those that are nervous and the liars. The more you go to the gym, the stronger the muscles get. Same thing as with fear.
We're inspiring the new generation.
I hope so.
Yeah.
It was actually the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People that helped me realize that we're all going to die.
I did want to ask you a couple questions.
Of course.
So I think what I find fascinating is that search that you had for, like, internal search, right? Like going from this is what I grew up with, this is what my upbringings, this is what I knew was right. How did you go about being open to something new without knowing that there is something new?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think my upbringing was it's rural Nebraska. I almost grew up in almost an old world environment. All I really knew at a young age was aunts, uncles, cousins. Wasn't exposed to a lot of friends. I went to literally a 2-room schoolhouse across from a feedlot, so I always smelled when I came home. So it was a very when I look back, it almost seems surreal to grow up in that, because it almost seemed like now when I look back that it wasn't 1970, 1980, it was maybe 1940, 1950. So I wasn't exposed to opposing political beliefs, religious beliefs, even like adventurous like travel or food. So I was in Nebraska literally until the day I graduated from dental school, so 27 years, you want to say? But I always kind of, it was actually the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People that helped me realize that we're all going to die. Believe it or not, we're all terminally ill and we're all going to die. That we should plan our adventure from point A today to the end. And so I had scripted out all the exercises of like your eulogy exercise. What do you want your family to say about it? What do you want your friends to say about it? What do you want your colleagues to say about you? Here's your eulogy. And it's a powerful exercise. And I realized that I didn't want to live that kind of Groundhog Day life, that I wanted to explore. And without that kind of beacon calling me, I wouldn't have gone to dental school. I don't know that I would even have a degree in undergrad. I wouldn't have gone to dental school. I wouldn't have taken a commission in the Army. That led me to a residency where I really was able to hone my skills. And then living in Europe. Living in Europe kind of force-fed me to be open-minded, because it was so polar opposite, and I was so fearful of everything that I was going to be exposed to there. The language, the food. I would die to find a Hard Rock cafe in a big city, because I know I could get a burger and fries there. And that's where I went from that 4 years later, the smallest little mom and pop place where I could see the kitchen and there are 3 people working in there. That's what I longed for. And like when you were talking about your trip to Italy, like it was a long kind of acclimation. And now I realize that when I'm doing things that I'm scared, I'm growing. And when I'm growing, I'm happy. So it all comes back to really that moment that I knew that I needed to chart my journey, and I needed to be a bigger and better journey than what I was seeing around me, to take on things that I couldn't talk to somebody and say, hey, what was it like when you were a dentist in the Army? I just kind of did it and realized that it would help me enjoy my story at the end of my days.
I'm just curious, sometimes you come to this realization, you think you know what you need to do. But there's this part here in the middle of doing, right? So was it obvious for you? Just you're like, all right, so I got to go and do it, or there was some debate going on within you to say, is it the right decision? Is it not? And if it was there, what was the trigger point to still do it?
I still, I've done entrepreneurial stuff. I've taken leaps of faith. Most of things never turned out exactly as I planned, but with persistence, it paid off. I still have a ton of internal dialogue when I make even like small staffing decisions, team decisions, things like that. I dialogue a lot, but sometimes it's literally me. It's proverbial, looking yourself in the mirror and saying like, listen, you got to do what you got to do. There's enough sleepless nights here. There's enough mulling this over. I think internally, a lot of times we know exactly what the answer is, but we love this sport of bouncing it back and forth and having the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder. I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, going back to like a lot of the big time entrepreneurs, they have this instinct that they basically say, trust your gut. In fact, I think it's the founder of Sony. They asked him, why were you able to make such profitable and productive decisions over time? And I'm sure there was a language barrier there, but he essentially said, but when I encountered the deal, I swallowed the deal. So he wanted to know how it felt internally. I call that trust your gut. You can call it, you know, sixth sense, whatever you want to do it. But I think most of the time we know it needs to be done. It's a matter of mustering up the courage to do that thing.
What you know needs to be done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you would talk to either your peers or dental students, what would you say about your experience overseas?
Life-changing. I mean, in so many ways. I shared with you tonight that the reason that I live in the Vail Valley was because I was exposed to people who can enjoy a 3-hour meal, which I never knew until I lived in Italy. People who played as hard as they worked. There's an old interview that I remember seeing with George Clooney, and they asked him, why do you live in Italy? He said he was filming something. I can't remember one of his movies. And so he's staying in Italy, Lake Como, where he now has a home. And he opened up the shutters and he said, I saw, you know, 3 blue-collar workers walking down the road, and they all had a loaf of bread, fresh baked bread, a bouquet of flowers, and a bottle of wine. And it was like, it was nobody's anniversary. It was nobody's birthday. It was just another Tuesday or whatever day it was. He said, at that moment, I realized that they celebrate life there. So that's what I was exposed to in Europe. And it's very much the culture here. I mean, you won't see people more excited in the world than when we get 10 to 12 inches of snow and they all go out and play. 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, 7-year-olds. And so I needed that almost counterculture to the workaholic farm upbringing to really feel in balance. And I always had a kind of a vision that it would be cool to live where other people vacation, because it just kind of like, why should you try and escape if you can just have what you want in your backyard? All of that I was given the courage by actually seeing it in real life when I lived in Germany and Italy. So it was that's the dramatic effect on my life now. I would say, as far as like how I think, it's dramatic too. I think I seek to understand more now, as opposed to, like, say you have your favorite presidential candidate and I have my favorite presidential candidate. I would say, Tiger, like, you don't know what you're talking about. You need to wake up, whatever, right? I would now want to understand why that platform is so important to you. Political, religious, anything that's not intuitive to me, it doesn't make sense. Instead of just saying, you know, be on with you, it's you're different than me. Now I want to understand, because maybe I'm the ignorant one, or maybe the answer is somewhere in the between. So that all was a huge eye opener for the 4 years that I lived overseas, and my life now would be dramatically different had I not been exposed to that.
So we probably wouldn't see any Relentless Dinners podcast.
No.
And none of that.
No.
Okay.
I'd probably live in Lincoln or Omaha, Nebraska. Both great places, but I can't ski there. I can't hike there. It's kind of dangerous to road bike there. And just like like when I was in Europe, I didn't know what good coffee tasted like. I didn't know what good chocolate tasted like. I didn't know what good wine tasted like until I got there. And so now it just heightened my senses for different people, different personalities, and doing the things that I'm scared of, because when you don't speak very good Italian, it's scary to go in and try and find a hotel or order at a restaurant. And you get, the more, it's strength and conditioning. The more you go to the gym, the stronger the muscles get. Same thing as with fear. Once you realize and kind of almost train yourself to say, okay, I feel that push against me. It's time for me to push back. that sphere. It's telling me what I need to do. Most of my life right now would, let's just say all of my life right now would be 180 from where it is right now. Had I not had those exposures to fear, been completely outside my comfort zone, and had a real opportunity to think about what's important for me as my life goes on in the journey.
You're one of the probably unique in a dental community as far as the schedule, right? The days you're open, the days you're closed. I know in today's environment, the balance, the work-life balance is becoming very, I think, more political question than none. Everybody's trying to figure this out. How would you address that? How would you say work-life balance is for you? Or would you say it's objective or it's subjective?
I have a little bit of struggle with the balance thing because for me it's just my life, right? Like on the days that I work, we go long days, and I'm not scared of work, but they're tiring. So 3 11s, 3 12s. At the end of that, I'm tired. But there's other things, business things that I really enjoy doing. And so say I work on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I wake up earlier on Thursday than I did those other days because I'm excited to do the new thing, whether it be stuff associated with the podcast. I shared that they were working on a book. So balance has always been a struggle with me because I default to work. When I'm bored, I work or I read or I educate. And so it's kind of that go, go, go. But there is that mechanism that tells you like you're overdoing it. Like more isn't necessarily better.
Right.
And those are the times where I actually will schedule ski days with Bennett, knowing that if we say, oh, we're going to ski tomorrow, we'll ski, but it might be at noon or it might be at 1 or it might be kind of when we get everything packed up. What I started doing recently is scheduling focus days, meaning I'm in the dental office, I'm working on the dental office. Buffer days, meaning I'm working on the dental office and other projects. And free days, meaning all that stuff has to go by the wayside because I need to recharge. I need to enjoy kind of the fruits of the labor, the environment that we have, the mountain, Oktoberfest, whatever it may be, and just kind of press pause on the work stuff because there's always more to do, right? So it's a challenge for me because I always default back to what I saw for the first 20-some years of life. But then I have the Italian experience in me that pulls me the other way and says, like, you should ski 4 days in a row. You should ski for a week straight on Christmas break. It's something that I'm always trying to calibrate, and I'm getting more refined where I'm really, really, really productive on the days I'm productive. And on the days where I schedule those free days, my goal is actually to be completely not productive, not check email, not respond to things that I have going on, and kind of pushing the ball down. And I find that I'm much clearer, much more focused, much more efficient, much happier because of that designating a day of where I don't try and hybridize it. I don't try and recreate and work on the business and work on patients. Those days are the most exhausting, and I've really tried to separate that out so I can just know what my objective is, know what the end goal is.
Last question that I have, that's, to me, it's very interesting because, we talked about being an immigrant, things like that, how our society is slightly judgmental on things. And I know that, with, again, your schedule and how you operate, but more importantly, how you try new things. And I think you were one of the early ones on podcasts. How did you go about it? Because I'm sure some people said, well, what the hell are you doing? Like, what, podcast? Like, how do you deal with those judgments? How do you deal with naysayers?
I have to put them out of my mind because when I think about it too much, that's where the fear starts to set in. Like, I sometimes joke that I was voted least likely to start a podcast in my dental school class. Podcasts weren't even a thing, but if that was up for election, I would probably be unlikely to put myself on some sort of platform. The reason that I started the podcast specifically was probably, let's say, twofold. One is that I was finding that in my practice that was struggling at the time, that all of my breakthroughs weren't coming from classic consultant advice, things I was finding online. I was searching marketing and business stuff outside of dentistry and applying them to dentistry, and that's where my breakthroughs and big wins were happening. At the same time, I had tons of free time because I didn't have patience, and so I was in education mode, and I found podcasting. The first podcast I really started listening to religiously was the I Love Marketing podcast, and then the podcast that I wanted didn't exist. So just like you spoke of earlier, it's almost like an entrepreneur instinct. Like if I'm having this problem, someone else is having the problem. So it's my duty to solve the problem, because I'm not only solving it for myself, but I'm solving it for, in this case, thousands of other dentists that want this information. So that's how it all got started. Still to this day, without exception, the introvert, shy, back of the room, don't raise your hand, Dave Maloley, wells up 10 minutes before I go with an interview. And the only reason I go through with it is that it's on the schedule and I made a commitment. And some of these people, yourself included, are people that I highly respect. And I was kind of raised in that you kind of look up to these people as opposed to a peer level. So little Dave Maloley sometimes wells up, and it just goes back to saying, like, here's the deal. Like, I'm not going to get stronger unless I sweat a little bit more, or lift a little heavier weight. And in this case, have a conversation that I don't feel completely prepared for. But it turns out good. It turns out okay. And as long as I'm present and asking questions that I would ask just if you were one-on-one at dinner, and forget about thousands of people who are going to listen to this, then it turns out to be a pretty good product. Because if I'm asking questions that I'm curious about, going back to the entrepreneurial thing, certainly hundreds of people that are listening have the same questions and want to know the insights that that person is delivering. But that's a really good question that no one's ever asked me. And yeah, it's like, just like balance, it is a constant, I'll call it a battle, because sometimes literally I hope going into a podcast interview that they cancel on me at the last minute. And I've done 100, I don't know, maybe like 120 of these interviews, and it's certainly gotten easier, and I feel more comfortable and I feel better at it. But I was watching I'm studying a public speaking thing today, and one of the best public speakers got on stage, and he was teaching others how to public speak. It was a video I was watching, and he said there are two types of public speakers in the world.
Oh no, that I don't.
Yeah, there are two public.
I know about the fears.
Yeah, there are two types of public speakers in the world: those that are nervous and the liars. And so that sometimes it just helps to know that misery has company, and to know that when you hit the stage, or in this case, start recording a podcast, that other people are very much there, even if you are an icon in dentistry or an icon in your profession. Still, public speaking or whatever it may be is listed as, sometimes people would rather die than speak. And to recognize that that's just part of the resistance that's going to well up, keeps me trying to make that easier and easier. So yeah, that made me think about things I hadn't thought much about. It happens very intrinsically, but yeah, I mean, when I'm on stage and when I'm podcasting, still get really nervous. Tends to get easier with time, but it's a long way from gone. Yeah.
Is there any, last question, is there anything that now you say, this is going to be one thing I'm going to do before I get on stage, or this is one thing I'm going to do to prep yourself, so that big Dave shows up, so to speak?
I got some really powerful advice before I gave my first, I would say, significant speech in front of a significant crowd, and it was like magic. The guy I was speaking to said, I want you to identify one person in the crowd, and one person only. Somebody who is desperate to hear your message, and save that person. And I identified somebody that I knew was going to be in the crowd, and somebody that I knew that was having a hard time. I spoke directly to that person, and just like when I just kind of blocked out all the thoughts of like, what if the audio's bad? What if this isn't perfect? What if they misunderstand me? All that stuff, putting that away. I literally told the story and the action points the take home points that I wanted to that one person. And I never would have dreamt I felt so comfortable on stage. Furthermore, that person was one of the first people to come out of the crowd after I was done and thank me for the message. So that's how I get dialed in, knowing that it's not just a speech. That if you do your homework and you think about how to make maximum impact, not on the masses but on one person, it turns out that there's a lot of people having that same pain point. When you're authentic and transparent and to the point and don't have a lot of fluff, I think that's what we're able to do, whether it be on a public forum or just being a good mentor or shoulder to lean on. I think dentistry can use more of that, candor and openness, and there's a lot of contention, and like we were talking about with race, religion, all those sorts of things. Are like, you don't know what you're talking about. Fee for service is the way. No, fee for service isn't the way. DSO is the way. No, DSO is the evil empire. Listen, like all these have their upsides and downsides, and we can all learn from them. But I think we need to be more unified as a profession and realize that our competition isn't the dentist down the street. It's people who aren't going to the dentist. It's people who would rather go to Disney than get the root canal. They'll get the extraction. So we need to not be so scarce in our mindset. We need to realize that there's plenty of dentistry to do, especially if you're willing to do all the procedures that are out there and build your skill set over time. Anyway, that's what I look for. That's what excites me about having this platform and having these conversations, is that you realize we all have the same struggles. We all have the same, more or less the same desires to upgrade our life as time goes on. And sometimes it can really be an island. Yeah. And that's part of the objective behind the podcast, is listen, like, your practice can be better. It can fuel your epic life. You can have the life of your dreams. You can help other people get what they want, whether it be a beautiful smile or a job, that, the people that you employ. So that's really the motivator that I have when I'm speaking, and that's compelling enough for me to get way beyond my comfort zone and taking on the next speaking engagement or recording the next podcast or whatever it may be. So yeah,
we're inspiring a new generation.
Say that again.
We're inspiring the new generation.
I hope so. Yeah. I think we have access. The people in dental school have access to information on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that I would have to pay $20,000 to a consultant to get access to, and it's better because we can dialogue about it and say, like, listen, that doesn't work. That's theory. They've never run a dental practice before. This is what really works in my dental practice. So, I think we talk about how it's harder for young dentists because they have more debt and all these things, but we forget the upside that they have. Like, this access to information is so powerful that it can give you a huge advantage if you allow it to be and are intent on, choosing your own adventure and creating your own path, as opposed to letting other entities decide who you can be in your career. In your path. Yeah. Not going to take more of your time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tyler. Yeah, and I hope our listeners will also enjoy that. I'm pretty sure they will. Oh, great. Thank you so much. Great to hang out with you.